Final Edition, Chapter 3, Letters Home. Ever since I arrived in Spain, I composed monthly letters, a news sheet to everybody in England. At times this amounted to 20 copies, which were photocopied and posted. And as you might imagine, an A4 sheet of tightly spaced lettering took me sometimes almost a day to type. I tried to include everything that each individual might want to hear, so that all were included and involved. I then had to go to the coast to get them copied. I sat in my studio next to the window with Ruff cramped up sitting beside me. The desk in front held my very old portable typewriter. Little did I realize that in some cases this photocopied letter produced resentment and exclusion. I stopped immediately I got to hear of it, and never produced another letter. Josephine left Hill Samuels after first contacting Sir Joshua Hassan, putting to him the valuable service he could provide to his existing client bank, offering a full package of financial advice in-house, linking Spain and the UK to set up a private client department. Our nearest neighbour, just up the hillside, easily seen from my kitchen window, was Nick Carter, an expatriate from England who operated all sorts of deals on the coast. He spoke Spanish, so acted as a go-between when arranging a maid to do the general cleaning. He brought round a number of teenagers, and out of these we chose Pili Lopez, who stayed with us all the rest of the time we were in Spain. She became a confidant of Anna's and helped her with her Spanish. She became an indispensable part of our stay in Casares, making my life so much easier, allowing me to get on with the garden and gallery. It was a very happy home, which ran smoothly, providing Anna with the right environment to concentrate on her studies. The previous inhabitants of the basket weaver's hut had been a family who now lived down the road. Their son acted a little strange, and used to wander around his old garden at night, and during the day scaring the living daylights out of anyone who stayed by pressing his face up against the windows and suddenly dancing out from behind a hedge. I don't think he really knew what he was doing. He was not violent, just very scary, and we called him Ben Gunn from Treasure Island. Whenever we stayed away from Spain, we parked Ruff with Lily and Early Soul, who lived in a block of flats in Torre Guadiaro. They were very kind, and it was another port of call for us to stay on our way back from Gibraltar. Later that July, an agreement was drawn up and signed by both parties, Josephine and Hassan's. Josephine then began to fly backwards and forwards to London on a fortnightly basis to link her clients with a servicing system provided continuity, using the expertise and products of London's financial sector to give a firm base to the scheme. This was a near-perfect solution for expatriates, which kept them in tune with the latest information and products. With her new status, I designed a completely new set of business stationery with an oval logo and company name of Opes to reveal priority. Hassan's paid for the printing, and Margaret Stone gave it a wonderful write-up for the company brochures, registered on the 11th of August 1989. The articles were signed on the 10th, and that very same year. That first winter in Casares proved that not only did it snow in winter, but the water froze too. The tops of the mountains held snow for quite some time, and the sleet used to rattle on the windows. The rain beat down like a water power jet, sometimes blown horizontally by the strong winds, turning the cobbled streets in the village into rivers, in full flood forcing its way into houses, in through the front door, out through the back. The wind from the Levant was sapping in its severity, making the unwary clutch onto trees and railings. It really was a very hospitable place. Mothers from the village would hurry by with their long black shawls wrapped round the children, shielding them from the cutting blasts. The wind from the southwest swept off the coast, bringing salt air and fine sand particles tearing at your face. The small, stumpy oak trees suffered from the blast, having their pointed leaves torn off, whilst others, already free, danced round the garden, trying to find somewhere to lodge. The doors rattled, and the wall plates swung to and fro, greatly in danger of being swept off. The clouds raced by, building up to threaten rain, then hurrying on again. Any failure to hold on tight to an open door found it forced back on its hinges, ready to swing back like the mainsail of a sailing ship going about. In the summer, the already oven-baked rocks from the previous day's heat would reflect their stored-up warmth, to join that day's penetrating rays to make the wise walk from shade to shade, proceeding crab-like close to the cliff sides. It made every breath feel like breathing before an open oven door, and woe betide anyone who grasped hold of an unpainted metal bar. The brilliant morning light would shaft through the trunks and boughs outside the open kitchen door onto the kitchen floor, vibrating with the activity of many insects dancing in its beams. One day you would be breasting against the penetrating blasts of the winds, and on another shuffling from one patch of shadow to the next, lest the unshaded sun touch your skin. Even with all this, there were many times when the day's heat would be perfect. The autumn air would be crisp, clear and still. The raked-up branches, the debris from the olive harvest, would be lit. The sweet-smelling smoke from all these bonfires spiraled up through the branches, and the ground would be crunching under the soles of your feet as you trod the travellers' footpaths and donkey trails. These wandered through the hills and valleys which dotted the landscape. The little, meandering stream in the valley bottom would be sparkling and clear, sometimes sandwiched between the planted vegetable plots belonging to the isolated white lime-washed huts, which sometimes held a tethered donkey, but was always home to a full complement of crowing chickens. Every drop of water, in its turn, fell down its course to the sea not far away. Each turn in the river caused a sheltered meadow formed within its bend, which always held a walnut tree with its brittle twigs and boughs. The panoramic views would be spectacular, would remind one of all the romantic tales ever told of majestic Spain. On the hillside would be grazed Pepe's goat herd, which traversed both sides of the ravine. The tinkling bells echoed from rock to rock to make a musical backdrop to the day's work in the garden. Every school day I took Anna to the bottom of the road to catch the bus that stopped on the coast road to Porto Casares. The road wound its way between crags, beside the steeply banked, rock-faced hillside on one side, and on the other the road fell away to the ravine below. Past the deserted restaurant that only opened its doors on very rare occasions, to the fields of coarse brushwood and gnarled cork trees, onwards to the vineyards and salt flats close to the sea. The goats, with their melodious bells, ranged the hills, whilst the sheep occupied lower ground, closer to the valley bottoms, watered by a tiny stream as it meandered, bubbling and chuckling towards the coast. It was about 3 miles of jerking, lurching, swaying propulsion. All was done at breakneck speed, so as not to miss the school bus. Before the influx of English tourists along the coast from Gibraltar and Malaga airports, about the time General Franco died, very few Englishmen lived in the hills behind the coast. And this was the road Anna and I travelled on, and was the only road, indeed a track. It was once travelled by horse and cart and donkey train. When the bottom of the road was reached, I dropped Anna off, parked the car, and walked Ruff along the beach. To the right, facing out to sea, was the port and the marina of La Duquesa. On the left, the rocky cliffs, coming down to sea level just before the town of Estepona and its esplanade. Ruff would bark at the waves, but never go in, race up and down having great fun, and I would browse amongst the piles of miscellaneous items on the beach. They were magical times. Beautiful beaches of fine yellow sand, with the sunlight bouncing on off the limpid blue sea, just Ruff and I, and not a soul in sight. Sometimes during the day I had to go down into the village to buy vegetables or some meat, pay a bill, or visit the bank. I set off, with Ruff following. Ruff never needed a lead. She always stayed at my heels, or if I sat down was under my chair. This wasn't taught behaviour. She just did it. As if I were in the garden or maintaining the fabric of the buildings, Ruff would always be laying down just beside a bush near the path, just up from the lawn. At one time she had seen a lizard come out of that bush. It was her goal in life to catch it. We walked up to the top of the road to Maria's family shop and restaurant, and then made our way down through the tiny lanes between the white, lime-washed, terraced houses. The cobblestone lanes were tightly cambered on either side to allow the storm waters to run off, and we always kept close to the shady side to keep out of the sun. At the very bottom was the village square, with a fountain in the centre, the restaurants circling around with their chairs dealt close to their sides, making a circular backdrop to the daily play being enacted out front. This was the place where all the village activity occurred, summer or winter, sunshine or rain, with the old folks sitting on stone benches close to the house fronts, and the small children racing round on their tricycles and push cars. That summer, in 1989, we experienced a forest fire for the first time. We saw the smoke in the distance, and the pall of smoke drifting towards us, making us increasingly aware that this could be serious. Gradually the crackling of the sap in the branches and the bursts of flame from the dried grasses not only gathered apace but became clearly seen in great detail as it made its way towards us. The wind was blowing the sparks and flames our way. The massive generation of heat created an added disturbance of air, a further sucking in of new oxygen. Planes circled overhead, dropping gallons of water, their tanks filled by trailing scoops in the sea. Helicopters rattled and darted overhead like errant hornets, radioing instructions and directing fire engines, bulldozers and beaters. It was late that afternoon that it became obvious that we wouldn't escape. The fire began to lick the outside of the sunroom, cracking the panes of glass and rushing round the base of the lower terraces in firework frenzy. The irrigation system didn't stand a chance to quieten the crackling glass or dampen the flames. I turned it on as the flames circled round section by section to get the maximum from the system. By this time the whole village had turned out to witness the event and lined the road above our estate. We ran round with buckets, putting down the fires nearest the house. The irrigation system had now melted. The rubber hoses, buried under the soil, became too hot, allowing the water in the system to spill out in all the wrong places. Water levels in the swimming pool quickly dropped as the buckets filled. The inflow of water to fill the pool halted due to the mains being turned off in the whole valley by the water board. We just had to stand by and watch. It was fortunate that at last the wind changed direction, pushing the flames down into the valley and away from the house. We had escaped the worst ravages and suffered just 2 broken panes of glass. What was serious was that our beautiful valley was now blackened and bare, with coils of smoke spurting up from wizened tree stumps. The place was never the same again. 2 years later you could still see what had happened. The oak trees killed were at least 20 years old, if not more. Even the undergrowth were bare and thin. The blackened rocks never became washed, even after the worst winter storms. It was only the vegetation at the foot of the valley which stayed the same. Peppy's goats had to graze in the other valley, taking their bells almost out of earshot. I never replaced the melted irrigation system to the lower terraces, for the fire had finished off the citrus trees which I had all so carefully planted and nurtured. Towards the end of 1989 and into 1990, Josephine was spending yet more time in the UK, servicing her existing client bank and giving many retirement talks to both British Telecom and Reed's International Paper Group. These talks in themselves provided more clients which needed looking after, so that to return to England was in itself not only a more simple arrangement but more convenient. Josephine had returned to work full-time for Hill Samuel, being invited back with a special agreement which provided no gap in her length of employment. This would allow her pension and possible buyout to be based on a continuous employment record. She left Hassan's solicitors' practice, mainly because they never really supported her position. The Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, Gibraltar had used Josephine's services as a financial consultant for much the same reasons as Hassan's had thought of: to offer privileged clients an increased investment service. They too failed to make full use of her expertise, being afraid that their clients would fear an airing of their financial state to an outside body. Owing to the United States' fears of money laundering by Colombian drug barons, they had been declared unfitting to operate, in turn closed down by fears of illegal money transactions by the British, who were in league with the United States government. This was not so for all branches, and in this case not the Gibraltar branch. The closing of the bank's resources was another reason why there was so much fear and worry by the residents along the coast who had lodged their money with them, used their services. The money I had invested, coming from my divorce settlement, sales from the gallery, and Josephine, lost for the time being until paid by the firm of Gibraltarian loss adjusters in dribs and drabs. This should not have surprised us. We had contacted a number of solicitors both in Spain and England to extend their interests into financial services, using their client bank as an introduction, to offer a personal and private service. These offers hadn't been taken up, the conclusion being that solicitors didn't want to lose their power over the clients, nor to take any supposed risks. Back in England, Helen had finished her drama course, obtaining her certificate. The first task for her was to have a studio photograph taken so that she could send it round to prospective auditioning agencies. She attended many auditions, meanwhile having singing lessons to be able to offer a complete set of skills for musicals and plays. A demonstration tape was made by Anthony to accompany the photograph. Both were well made and presented a good introduction. To earn money she took on a position with the local cinema, flexible in their hours, understanding her reasons for having to be available for auditions at a moment's notice. And from that time she found Christmas work during the pantomime season, which gave her experience and the necessary equity card. Ever since attending arts educational school in Tring, she had carried the banner for a lifetime in the theatre. She lived and breathed acting and singing, practising daily. There was never a more dedicated exponent or interested follower in the latest film, play or musical, able to sing along with their score and recite the lines, dreaming of that moment when a call was to be made.